Hello and welcome to this webinar on transforming modern policing with the use of digital technologies. Today you will learn about the award-winning real-world example of this implemented by HCL and the Greater Manchester Police. First, let me introduce our speakers for today. Shard Rathi is the police sector lead at HCL Technologies. He has more than 20 years of experience working across the IT landscape. Over the last decade, he has been working with various police forces across the UK, assisting them in defining their mobile strategy and helping them to execute their mobile programs. Shard's area of expertise includes digital transformation and people change, with a key focus on benefit realization and how technology can act as an enabler and play a significant part in solving complex business problems. Our headline speaker for today is Chris Sykes. Chris is an Assistant Chief Constable at the Greater Manchester Police, where he has worked for the past 24 years. His current responsibilities are for the Information Services Transformation Programme, a huge programme transforming the way that Greater Manchester Police uses information services to protect their communities. He has a passion for leading change, particularly through the use of new technologies. So firstly, I would just like to say hi to Chris and hi to Shard, and thank you both for joining us today. Just a little housekeeping on my side. We will be doing a Q&A at the end of the session. So if you want to pop any of your questions into the Q&A chat box, we will endeavour to get to as many as possible towards the end. So without further ado, Chris, I'm going to hand over to you for today's main presentation.
So thank you very much, and thank you everyone for joining us. Thanks for that kind introduction. My name is Chris Sykes, and as was said, I'm an Assistant Chief Constable in Greater Manchester Police. So for the past few years, I've been working on what we call Information Services Transformation, and over the next 40 to 45 minutes, I'm going to talk about our work with HCL on our mobile platform. But just a little bit first about Greater Manchester Police. We are a really big force, one of the biggest forces here in England. We're responsible for the safety of about 2.7 million people. Now, we currently have, about 6,700 officers, 564 PCSOs, and 3,800 support staff. But we used to be a lot bigger, and that was one of the challenges that we had to face. We used to have over 8,000 police officers, for example. And my responsibility is to try and make our workforce more efficient, more effective, more productive, using digital technology as an enabler to do that. And over the last 6 months, I've also been responsible for local policing. And that's about 4,800 officers serving all our districts across Greater Manchester. And I think because we're doing this today, when we've just in Greater Manchester, we're dealing with the changes to the coronavirus lockdown guidance and legislation around one of our districts, Bolton. I really feel that it's a good example of the challenges that modern day police forces are having to deal with. I've been dealing with lots of partners today in Bolton. Our officers struggling with the large amount of demand that's coming in about people breaching COVID regulations. And I do feel satisfied that the steps that we've taken over the last few years in providing them with the equipment they need at the front line to do their job has really, helped the position we're in today. And I'll try and explore that over the next few slides. So a little bit around the business strategy and background and where this all came from. So like all UK police forces, Greater Manchester Police was facing increasing challenges. We have been experiencing for many, many years now, probably the last 5 to 6 years, increasing demands on the police. When I was a response officer in the late 1990s, I didn't have the complexity and challenges to deal with that our frontline officers do today. The demands of modern day policing, the amount of safeguarding work that we need to do with the most vulnerable people in our communities, dealing with mental health, dealing with challenges around child sexual exploitation, county lines, means that the police officer's job is much more complex. We also saw recorded crime increases, not necessarily just crime going up, but also the rules and regulations around crime changing to mean that a lot more was getting recorded and the complexities around recording crime. Throughout this, we were having, big constraints on our budgets as well. We were having to lose quite a lot of resource, as I said before, from over 8,300 officers down to around 6,000 officers at its lowest, with similar reductions in police staff numbers as well. So a real challenge with that increasing demand, the shrinking workforce, and then it being much more complex, as I talked about. A lot more of crime today is committed through cyber-type crime, fraud, online fraud, targeting the vulnerable people, a lot more business crime, serious acquisitive crime, the traditional burglary dwellings, vehicle crimes, and robberies are still a challenge. But we've also had this extra demand come through from the digital type of crime that's now taking place. So we had those real challenges. And in line with the national policing strategy, we wanted to do more. We came up, we wanted to really think about what our strategic direction needed to be. How are we going to make our workforce much more productive, much more efficient, so they could do a brilliant job when they're dealing with the victims, so they could give great public service? How could we empower our staff to have real-time access to information so they could make the decisions rather than relying on a chain of command when they didn't need to? So it was about how we make our workforce more mobile, how we collaborate using digital technologies, making sure that we can capture the best type of evidence through the use of digital technologies, doing it sort of smarter and faster. And there's been a lot of work about how we can understand what we call in the police threat, harm and risk reduction, identifying the threats, understanding the harm that comes to it, and looking at the risk of that incident, happening. And we wanted to do that through being able to brief our officers properly, having triage assessment tools that could help us understand that, to make sure that we have sophisticated deployment of resource. We also had multiple different systems in GMP, and some of our systems were very old, and all our officers were having to access many different systems to complete a task. And then I guess what this is all about, it's that improved contact with members of the public and improvement in our service provision to them. But we also want to improve public contact through more digital engagement. And this was really, really linked into what nationally is happening in policing and what nationally lots of police officers were trying to do. And again, just reflecting on the COVID experience that we've had over the last 4 or 5 months, I really feel that the strategic direction has proven its worth, as we've been able to deploy our officers very, very flexibly over the last 4 or 5 months when we've been dealing with lockdown. We've had a lot of reduced sickness because our officers have been able to work in different ways, work from home, use our technology in home-based solutions as well, and very different deployment mechanisms. So I really feel that the crisis that we're facing now has almost, helped, proven that the strategic direction that we were traveling on was correct. And these are some of the objectives that we set ourselves. While the challenges and the drivers were really clear, we needed to have a very, very clear objective to make sure that we were all sighted on what we were trying to achieve. And we did a lot of work, a lot of groundwork to agree what these objectives were, making sure that they were measurable as much as possible. Providing real-time information to officers so that they could make the decisions at the scene rather than having to come back. So we could take airwave traffic, that's our radio system. So rather than officers shouting up for information using a radio, being able to get it from their mobile phone at the scene, providing information to officers before they arrived at a particular incident so that they were better prepared for what they might face and therefore safer. We wanted to increase presence. Everyone talks to us about patrol and people don't see officers on the beat. It's one of the things we get a lot from elected members and members of the public about being able to see police officers, police community support officers out on the street. So this was about how we could try and reduce travelling time backwards and forwards of police stations, improving that sort of connection with citizens. We wanted to take out some of the waste within the systems. So rather than having a 10-stage process, maybe reducing it to a 3-stage process, simplifying the job that the police officer needed to do for creating records. We wanted to take out some back office systems. So like many other police forces, we did have a process where a police officer would go to maybe a home address to deal with a domestic burglary. And at that address, they would ask to borrow the phone of the victim to phone through to a crime recording bureau that used to then take the details from the officer over the phone and enter into the system. We wanted to have a look at how we could reduce the back office overheads of that process, have the impact on the victim be a lot less, and the officer be able to capture the details electronically at the scene. And finally, about how we could improve proactive policing, how we could get ahead of demand, make sure we've got the correct supply to meet that demand, enable our officers to go into the right communities to try and prevent crime before it actually happened. And I think one example I want to show on this slide is how we really tried to empower officers, because what we did in Greater Manchester Police was when we rolled out our first several thousand mobile phones to our frontline response and beat officers, we allowed them to use those phones for their own personal use as well. So empowering the officers and trusting the officers. Now, this was difficult, as you can imagine. There was our professional standards branch were concerned about that. We were concerned about the amount of data that might be used. But we made a decision that we wanted to trust our staff, allow them to make personal calls if need be, personal text messages, use them for appropriate apps such as the news and that sort of thing, but then provide a secure workspace on that phone for them to do the work they needed to do. That really brought people into using the phones. They felt that they were being valued at work. They felt that they were being given, some of them for the first time, some proper kit to enable them to do their job. So, been a long journey, and we've still got a long way to go. So whilst this goes back to 2015, we have dabbled in digital technology for our frontline officers several times. I recall many years ago, we basically built a computer into the boot of a car to try and enable access to all our systems through a screen and a keyboard that was put into the passenger seat area. By the time we costed it, it became so expensive to be able to roll that out to our frontline officers that never took off. We also have tried things like PDAs, when we used to have the little PDA devices to record certain things, such as stop searches, and the old Blackberries with the little keyboards that we rolled out for our frontline staff. As well, we had those, but none of them really took off. They were all okay, but we never got the transformation that we wanted. So based on those learnings, we wanted a different approach, and we decided we needed to partner with a technology company. And obviously, after all the tendering and procurement processes, we partnered back in 2015 with HCL, and we decided that we would go out with a rollout of 6 business processes. And this was quite key, that the contract we had with HCL back then was around delivering specifics. 6 of these, please, and then in 2016, 9 of those. And there were particular apps allowing our frontline officers to basically connect to our existing command and control and records management system. There was a continuous feedback mechanism that we put in place. So officers could feed back into the system, into us and HCL, so that we could learn, we could develop those apps further. There was an awful lot of engagement with the staff about what they needed to do it. And we tried to increase, the apps that were available to them throughout that time, to make sure that the officers were getting what they wanted. And it was a really speedy rollout. And, we did it quickly. We got the devices out within 2 years. All the business processes were up and running, and then we started to remodel them. So you can see there in 2017 that we were into phase 2. We transformed 7 more operational areas. And we did see, which was excellent, a more mobile workforce. We saw more increased street presence. Our officers felt more empowered, and we had our apps mapped to our back-end system. The apps on the devices were connected into our back-end system. And what was really challenging for us through that time is we saw a massive uptake at the start as people were excited and keen to use those apps. But the challenge was keeping them engaged in that process and engaged in using the mobile technology, because it was quickly, and we could see that some people preferred and slipped back into the old ways of working because that's what they knew. They gave the mobile a go, but we couldn't keep them, and then they went back to their old ways of doing it. So there's an awful lot of work with what we had mobile Spocs and super users to try and encourage staff to really embrace the technology. And we actually found then, as we do today, that the newer officers coming into the organisation, being given the devices right from the start of the career, their uptake was much higher than some officers that have been in Greater Manchester Police for quite a while. In 2018 and into 2019, we did further work with mobile to integrate into our new IOPS system. Many of you may have heard that Greater Manchester Police launched a new command and control, a new records management system, and a brand new data warehouse last summer, which was a huge piece of transformation for us. And mobile was part of that and connected to the new technologies that we're introducing. One of the things that we wanted to address, though, was better integration into all the systems. And with HCL, we worked with them on them supplying the integration between our command and control and records management system. That enabled us to link mobile, command and control and records management in a much more efficient manner, and enabled us to do things like develop the Force Coordination Centre dashboard, which I'll show you later, the real-time monitoring of all the information that we have across Greater Manchester. As we move forward a little bit around contracts again, what we learned is that if you're working with someone like HCL, asking them to deliver 6 or 9 or 15 apps, is relatively straightforward with them. They have the technology, they have the people, they will develop what you want. But we wanted more from a supplier. We wanted to work with them in a much more flexible approach. And we've been working hard to develop the contracts and the way that our relationship with HCL, so it can be more fleet of foot, more innovative. We can work together as partners rather than absolutely specific deliverables, having an envelope of contracts where we can develop depending on what specific issues are happening in the environment. So this has been a real journey for us, like they often say on things like the X Factor. But we're now on the next wave of transformation. We want to be more preemptive. We want to get into using things like chatbots, more robotics. We want to improve the way it works for our officers. So on this slide, transformation, this is just an example. I don't want to go through the whole of this process, and many of you will have seen this process before, but it shows how incidents come into the police are then dispatched to officers through radio, how officers arrive at the scene and what they have to do. They then drive back to custody maybe with a prisoner and then book the person into prisoner. And what we did with a lot of our processes was break them down into a number of steps. So this was a 10-step process here, and try and work out how we can use the platform that we had, the relationship we've got with HCL, to improve that process. And it was really key what we wanted to do. We wanted to focus on optimization, automation, and what we called the elimination of redundant steps, rather than just transferring that 10-step process into a digital version, which would have been okay, but we still would have had a 10-step process. We really wanted to change it into a transformational process, a much more efficient process for our staff. And we've done that really effectively in some areas, but let's be honest, we have still got some way to go in other areas, which I'll talk about a bit later. So this is an example of how we've changed it into a 3-step process. The tasking, the arriving at the scene, and the arriving at custody. Access to the command and control logs, the inquiries, access to PNC, that's the Police National Computer. Most of the time, officers would shout up on the radio in the past and ask to do a check on that when they can do it live on their device. They can update the logs, they can do intelligence checks. It's just an example of that process and how we take that, how we've made it much more streamlined for the officer. So the officer's got the information they need, they can be more effective at the incident they're at, and can provide a better public service. So a little bit about impact and benefits. What this slide just shows here is initially some of the improved officers' performance that we saw. So, identifying that crimes have committed, processing time improvements, less back office time, officers having the information they needed at the scene. Often they would ask, before we had this technology, for our operational communications branch to read out an incident log over the airwave radio system, to understand exactly what job they were at. Now they could have a quick look at that job in detail on their phone. They could check the intelligence. They could check the police national computer. So they were much more efficient once they actually got to the incident and to deal with it. We have a system on our mobile phone platform for people to be able to take statements, which reduced the amount of time people were taking for simple statements from 45 minutes to 20 minutes. We had a paper traffic office report submission that we were using, and rather than it taking days to go through the system, by digitalizing it, it took a few minutes. And then completing a stop search, taking it from several minutes writing things down to then going to a back office system to type it all up, to be able to type it into a device. And what we calculated through the first stages of it, that we were having much more visible time on the street from our officers. We were seeing 80% of the transactions being conducted outside of police stations. And what we often talked about with the actual mobile phone, with the app supplied by HCL, was that it was equivalent to having a police station in an officer's pocket. The officer, he or she, was able to access all the information that they normally got at the police station. If you remember a little while ago, I talked to you about how we used to have a crime input bureau, a crime bureau that officers used to ring through to. There was a 60% reduction in demand on that crime bureau by officers being able to put crimes in themselves. And you can imagine the back office savings we could make there. Lots of people came to visit us as we visited elsewhere, and there was lots of learning saved. Now, they sound great. And in some areas, I would say we've been much more successful than others. So accessing things like information intelligence for police national computer has been fantastic. Things like stop search is much more complicated. So when you're having an interaction with a member of the public and you are detaining them for a search, which is quite an intrusive police power, and sometimes you feel that you may be at risk, typing information into a mobile phone can be quite difficult. So many of our officers do it immediately after the stop. But we're now working with HCL about how we could even improve that process, to use like a chat bot to automatically understand the location that the officers were at, to understand the time and date straight away, to be able to capture the details much more effectively through voice control. And that's where we see the next stage of our development with HCL, to use technologies such as chatbots to improve those processes even further. Because this is all about trying to make our officers more efficient. At the moment, we're having about 13,000 transactions per day on our Optic mobile phone devices across Greater Manchester. It's a fantastic number. It's been going up month on month, but we think we've got a long way we can take that further. And this is the slide which shows how it's developed over since last summer. So in June this year, we had almost 400,000 transactions. Now, those transactions without the phones would have been done back at the police stations, back through the old systems, or over things like airwave. We're now, we had a major go live last July with the launch of IOPS, and we've seen the big increase since then. Now, what we're finding though, folks, is that the distribution of those transactions isn't equal amongst all our officers. So we have some officers that are very, very high demand users of Optic, and some officers that use it less. And that's a challenge for us, to try and increase usage, develop it across the piece. And it's that cultural change that we're trying to deliver to an office. And I always say that in the past, when I joined the police, I was given a pocket notebook and a pen. And that's what we've been doing for the last 20 odd years. Now police officers are joining the police, and police staff are being given the latest smartphone and being asked to use it. And some of them are much more engaged with that process than others. And this is what I talk about sometime, about the police officer, the police station in a pocket. The dots on the map, on the pre-Optic map, show where our police stations were, and that's where activity was taking place before we rolled out Optic. Very much reliance on going to a job, driving back to the police station. On the second map there, you can see how, just as a little example, we have transactions taking place all over Greater Manchester from the devices, and reducing the amount of time that people are travelling to, going backwards and forwards to police stations. We've got much more again to do on this, but we saw these tremendous results right from the start of rolling out Optic. So what I would like to do now is just hand over to my colleague Sharad from HCL, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the learnings.
Thanks, Chris. So this is Sharad. So in terms of learnings, if I talk about, I broadly classify them into three categories. So one is how this program is perceived across the organization. So typically, like any other program, every program, is supposed to have a start date and an end date. But this is slightly different, which is more of a BAU types program, because you need a continuity in this type of an engagement where you probably in the initial contract duration of a year or a 2 year time period, you only set up these processes in place. And then it's the time where you start harnessing the real benefits of it. It should be run as a continuous business program rather than an IT project is one of the key learnings where now we have seen across various police forces. And the other one is this giving this as a holistic view. So what I really mean is every police force in UK I've seen now they have various digital programs going on where multiple different teams are engaged in driving those initiatives. Ideally, all of that has to be seen as a single initiative because they are all linked with each other. So mobile is not a separate program, but part of a wider digital program is the second sort of main learning which we have seen. And again, as part of this, agility is one of the key parameters. Not every initiative you will take will give you a return on investment in this type of a program. And that is a bit hard to sort of pass on or accept as a message, because there in these type of engagements, you will have successes, you will have failures as well. And key is really to identify those failures and drop those sooner than later. And as soon as we can move on. It's should be run in a completely sort of agile manner where you are continuously delivering more and more, listening to your end user, and then now moving on. And last bit is what I think Chris also touched upon as part of his initial slides, where construct is becomes key to the success of this program. Policing, like any other public sector organization, is there are very stringent procurement rules in and around what you can or cannot do. So if you just go by what is written there in the contract, then you are not really harnessing the power of this technology because of the digital nature or agile nature of this. It should be seen as a platform rather than an individual sort of 6 apps you deliver, or you deliver 9 apps. If the platform is there, then how many different ways you can harness the power of that platform is what you see as you go along on that journey. This is really key. Now I'll give it back to Chris to just give his experiences from GMP's perspective, because I'm sure in last sort of 3-4 years they have seen it now very closely.
Yeah, thank you, Sharad. Thanks for that. Yeah, it's an awful lot of learning for us. I mean, just a few things from my point of view as sort of the senior responsible officer, and one of those was around contracts. Now, as a police officer, I mean, contracts is not something that I've ever been really interested in the past, but I did find that the contract we had with HCL was quite restrictive initially. It was about delivering a set number of things, a set number of apps. But flexibility was really the key. And as I said earlier, one of the things that we wanted to allow is to, be able to work with HCL in doing a much more flexible approach. So we saw a need that we saw a need and an opportunity to bring a dashboard into GMP. And we were able to use the flexibility that we'd negotiated in our contract to work with HCL to deliver that in really quick time, really innovative. And it was developed on the hoof in a way, rather than the normal 2-year sort of plan that we would have had for the apps. And I'll show you just a screenshot of that dashboard later on. And we're using that going forward. For those that are particularly interested, what we've actually got is a contract where we have an envelope of funding available to us with HCL around set parameters that enable us to build different types of apps with them, depending on what the need is and what the current situation is. And that's been useful over the past several months with the flexibility we've needed through COVID. A few other parts for me that are really important on learning is where does this land in your organization? Who is the business owner for mobile, for example? Is it your traditional information technology branch or your information services branch? Is it a business owner, such as your local policing lead? Where does it sit? And that was always a problem for us about it being a technology solution. But actually, it's about improving public service and making our officers more effective. So me, in the role of head of local policing, I see that as a massive benefit for me being a big influencer of our current mobile work, because I have that local policing portfolio. Just going forward, I guess one of my challenges I have is keeping the momentum going, keeping the structures that we have in place on the districts to keep bringing developments. And what I've found is, and learned personally, is, you know, my personal mobile phone, that I have an Apple device, the regular updates and changes I bring actually keeps me interested in that device and keeps me learning and introduces me to new apps and new ways of doing things and changing my life. And we needed something similar within GMP. So Sharad and HCL will, I'm sure, talk about how we have really pushed them with regards to the amount of developments and updates we can bring to quickly respond to officers' feedback. Officers have been fed up in the past when they've put in suggestions and change requests into departments that sort of languish there. And we actually went to West Midlands Police and saw that they were really good at this. They were really good at quickly responding to officers' needs. And we've learned from that, and we're trying to get much better at it. So let's just move on a little bit. So a little bit about the direction ahead. So what I wanted to just obviously show here is that we've got 4 main areas that we're now focusing on going ahead. We've got process, information, location, and user. And this is really important, that in the processes, we want to have more simplified process than what we've got now. So some of our apps at the moment basically follow our records management system. You know, it's basically looking at the fields in the records management system and populating them in the map in a similar process. So we've got several more of our business flows that we need to change to make that much more efficient for our officers. And we also want to make sure that they've got information, more insight that can help inform that process that takes place. So they have the different process, they've got the information, they can make their real-time decision making. And we also want, I'm working with HCL on how we can have more dynamic team working and assistance. So what I'm really excited about with the future developments that we're looking for is officers on their phone being able to understand what their colleagues are doing in the area, the tasks that are currently open, the fact that an officer might be around the corner and what job they're dealing with. It's not something they can see routinely, because if they're out, they don't have access to that visibility of the command and control system. So be able to go into a community to see that, you know, your colleague is at a job around the corner, and for the system to be able to tell you that there is a wanted person's address at this location, or that somebody might be on bail, or that you're entering a vehicle crime hotspot, for example, is something that we want to do around the geolocation technology that we want to bring forward. And again, this is going to be challenging, but really exciting, enabling the user to use a lot more voice control systems, to be able to talk to the device, to be able to maybe dictate short statements into the device, particularly when you're doing a stop search, to be able to answer some chatbot questions to quickly move through a stop search process. So we've got those sort of main focus areas for us. And the next generation services that you talk about at the bottom of the slide, you know, this is where we're looking at, you know, assistants, the virtual assistants, using chat spots and voice to make the officer's experience, you know, much simpler for them able to really give the service and focus often on the victim or the witness rather on the pen and paper, which has been a problem for us in the past. Enable our officers to be properly briefed, to have location services, to be able to harness local social media. And much more something for HCL than me, but what we're talking about is a low-code platform. So something that's very customized and easy to publish, able to do things ourselves on it. We are looking at how we can develop more analytics. So better understanding of what our officers are doing and where they're doing it, using that information to inform where we should be patrolling, some intelligence decision making, and better access for our citizens. So what our citizens can do, I was able to send electronic details to citizens and then be able to respond. Much more digital collaboration is the way forward for us. So I had to ask several times what RPA was, because it stands for Robotics Process Automation, and that's the sort of the talk at the moment with us in HCL about how we can use robotics to improve the processes. So that's where we are now, and the sort of plan that we have for the next 2 years. And just in the sort of final 5 minutes of the main presentation before we go into the questions section, I was just going to give you some simple slide shots of a couple of the solutions that we've got. And this is just our example of what's displayed on our mobile phone devices. Our staff currently have the Samsung S9 or S10 devices, a really good modern device. It enables them to have use fingerprint or Face ID to unlock it rather than typing passwords in. It makes it smoother for them. It's got really good battery life, and a decent display enabled some access here. And what you can see from the apps on the right is just an example of some of them. We've actually updated since this screenshot, but we have federated data search. So you type in the name Chris Sykes and it'll search our systems and the Police National Computer and bring back the returns. You can then click on the return, it'll go into the full records management system and photograph of that individual. We have our events, such as a crime event. You can go and update a crime, add a report to what you've done to that crime. You can submit a brand new crime. Obviously, you can review your incidents and update your incidents through the Incident app. And I won't go through them all in turn, but you can see the sort of functionality that we've got there for people. Not delivered yet, but obviously we're working on a fingerprint reader biometric solution as well, which we have working. Obviously, we're not going to be rolling it out through the current COVID crisis, but that's one of the areas that we have for rollout during 2021. And this is something I'm particularly passionate about and proud about. This is just a screenshot. It's much better when it's running live. But for those that understand policing, this will give an example of how we're able to interrogate all our system and pull back all our current demand. So this is a screenshot showing, and this was actually from December, I think, showing the demand that we had across Greater Manchester. In our incident queues, for example, at the top there, we showed we had 1,360 open incidents in Greater Manchester. Our open crimes for investigation. And this is a system that refreshes for most things every 2 hours and refreshed for incidents every 3 minutes. In the past, we've had to run a search in our systems to bring back this data. You would have to go into a system and interrogate it with a search. But what HCL have done for us is plug into our systems, being able to interrogate the data and bring it back and display it in this way. This is a really flexible system that's brought massive usage across Greater Manchester, massively used by supervisors, as you can imagine. You can click into any of these sections and then deep dive into the issues. So again, just to explain a few things, domestics are what we call domestic abuse events that we put in for every domestic incident we go to. A care plan could be an adult or child care plan to manage the vulnerability with that person. Obviously we had 144 missing people across Greater Manchester when this snapshot was taken. And then it also shows the amount of mobile usage that we've got. This system is used in our force operation centres, across OCB, our operational communications branch, and is used in districts by our frontline staff, and has got massive feedback. This system was developed by HCL really quickly. I was so impressed with the time. Probably from the first idea from myself and a colleague called Mark Jones to delivery was in less than 6 months. And then the system is building sort of month by month with regular updates. The next stage for this is a new user interface based on feedback we've had from our staff. Well, I haven't actually put this slide together because I don't obviously like to talk about this, but we have won quite a few awards, which is very nice for us. So here's some of the awards that the mobile solution has delivered. Most recently, the Gold Award winner for innovation. And I think the reason why sometimes I like to identify this is because this is for the staff that have worked on it. This is for HCL, the people that have contributed massively to it. And this is for the police officers, police staff in GMP that have worked really hard on delivering this solution. So I'm very proud of what they've all done. But we have an awful lot of challenges. We've had challenges with IOPS. We've had some challenges with mobile. But I am really excited that we are learning a lot. We're learning a lot from other police forces and from other industries. And we've got an exciting 12 months ahead with some big upgrades coming both to our mobile technology with the use of chatbots, user interfaces, and our dashboard. Okay, I think I've delivered the presentation in exactly 40 minutes, which is what I was asked for. So I think I'm going to hand back now to Regina. Regina, thank you very much. And I think we will deal with a few questions if there is any on there. I think I need a drink because my voice is going a bit hoarse.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thanks, Shard. That was a fantastic presentation, and I think I'm glad you have wrapped up on the 40 minutes because we've quite a few questions actually that have come in. So I think that's always a very positive sign. So Chris, it's over to you again, I'm afraid, for the first one, but Shard, please do add if you would like. How did you cope with the constant changes in terms of resources on the program, changing expectations, feedback from the end users?
Well, that's really interesting, and it has provided some problems. So if the question's asking about resources on the program, we have had some continuity with a couple of police officers that have worked on the program for many years now. Now, for again, those people in the police, that does provide a challenge because we are police officers employed with warranted powers. Really without, we have these powers to go out there and serve the public and make arrests. And these police officers have been running a program working closely with HCL. But we thought it's really important to have that continuity and to have officers that actually understand what police officers need working with HCL. We have had project managers, very important people that have really added to it. We've had support from IS branch. But I think that uniformed officer presence in the project has meant that it's been a really down-to-earth project and really delivered what everybody wants. I guess from other people, there might have been some issues with changes of things like SROs, so I wasn't always doing this. And sometimes that gives a bit of a change in emphasis and direction when, I guess, the bosses change, which I always understand and can sometimes tricky. I think the biggest challenge I've been is that we have a really small team delivering this in GMP. We're a big force and we're really stretched with transformation and reliant on a couple of individuals. So that is something that is a challenge for us. If those individuals were to move on, we could feel vulnerable. But developing a super user network where we have police officers and police staff who are specialists in each district driving this means that we've got some resilience. Making sure that local leaders, these are local superintendents, know and use the technology and drive it with their own staff. And me doing things like I go out to districts and do quarterly performance reviews, they're called, very policey thing where we have a look at how many crimes places have had. But we are now moving away from that and asking questions about how are they using digital technology to improve the service they're giving. And that means that there's lots of other versions of me running Bolton, running Oldham, running Wigan, really driving the use of digital technology, which has really helped.
Great, thank you very much. Shard, do you want to add?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, the key here is, and the only way to address this particular requirement is if you look this as from a platform perspective. So obviously, it's not a point-to-point solution for a point-to-point problem. It is a platform in place. So scalability and architectural principles, they become really, really handy if the solution has been designed in such a way where it can address to those unknown requirements. That's what is needed to address this type of a requirement, because the more you roll out, the more you get back from the officers. So platform becomes a handy thing now from a technical architecture perspective here.
Great, thank you. We'll keep going. We've quite a few questions, so keep it short so we can get through as many as possible before the hour. So how did GMP address cultural behavior around paper versus digital? Did you encounter any problems around user engagement, use and engagement?
Yes. It's the biggest challenge, isn't it? It's the biggest challenge, folks, isn't it? In that some people in day-to-day life love technology. They love mobile phones. They're on them all the time. And lots of young people are on phones all the time. It's part of their life. but for other people, it's not their thing. So one of the things is that if you've been for the last 5 years going to a burglary, investigating the burglary, driving back to the police station and typing up your report into a desktop computer with a big screen and a keyboard, and that's what you've been doing for 5 years, suddenly saying to somebody, you now used to use your fingers and thumbs to type it in at the scene, it's not for everybody. It's not for everybody across all the ranks, and that is a real challenge for us. So what we are doing, and some of this is really sensitive and you have to do very, very carefully, is you have to really show and work with these people to show the benefits of it, but not dismiss that people are different and people work in different ways and it's not for everybody. So I've taken a pretty gentle approach to this. We've really, really emphasized those officers that are getting a lot out of the system and learning from them about how we can make it better. And because of the government's recruitment and drive to put 20,000 extra police officers into policing across England and Wales, Greater Manchester Police is now seeing an uplift again of officers. We've got a lot of young student officers coming in to Greater Manchester Police, big intakes of officers. I welcomed 60 in the other day. And they really want to get straight stuck into the phones because they've never used GMP's old desktop computers. So some of your turnover affects that. And I've never been dismissive of anybody who wants to use a full desktop computer because that's the way they've done it for the past 15 years. You have to work with people. And sometimes by putting them alongside an officer that uses a mobile phone and seeing the benefits, they've embraced it as well. We have usage figures. We know what people are using them, which ones are and which ones aren't. And we can use that in our one-to-ones or appraisals with staff to ask, whether they should, what more do they need? Do they need extra training, extra support, any extra coaching to get the best out of it? What I've never wanted to do is make sure that the mobile phone affects that frontline service. So when you're going to the victim of something terrible might have happened to them, your focus needs to be on them. And the technology needs to enable you to give them the best service and not being so focused on trying to type a thing into a phone that you're distracted from actually what that victim needs.
Thank you. Another one here. How is the National Enabling Programme Blueprint landing across Greater Manchester Police to utilise federated identity with other forces and agencies?
I think someone knows a lot more about the National Enable Programme than me. So for the person that's asked that question, a few people that have asked about NEP and Office 365. Folks in Greater Manchester, we still haven't got Windows 10 yet. That is another piece of transformation that is getting delivered towards the back end of this year. So we've also got a huge rollout of brand new laptops and desktops as part of the program to get our colleagues onto Windows 10, which then brings it all the benefits of Office 365 and our relationship with the National Enabling Programme. So what I've been doing, that I'm not the SRO of that program. That's on track. It'll deliver the new devices. It'll deliver Windows 365 and Office, and it's linked into the National Enabling Programme. But we are behind many police forces on that. Whilst I think we've been there and at the forefront in mobile, that's an area that we're still catching up on. So we are linked in for the people that asked that question. We've got to deliver the Windows 10 platform and Office 365, and then we'll start those connections. But we're seeing already the fantastic opportunities Office 365 and Net will give us. The access to apps, the access to the forms solution that we can use through drive-through Office 365, and we're speaking to Sharad around how mobile is going to integrate with that going forward.
Sharad, then over to you. Give Chris a break for a second. I've kind of two questions here for you. HCL must be working with a number of the UK police forces. What kind of difference in terms of levels of digital maturity are you seeing, and how are you kind of cross-leveraging the learnings there? And the second one is, what is the structure of the Optic team? What roles make up that team, and maybe what area of the organisation they sit?
I'll take the first one first. So yes, we are working with various police forces, not only currently, now almost 8 to 10 years now. And different police forces I've seen at very, very different levels of maturity. But one thing which is good is none of the forces are at a starting point. They're all either midway or somewhere between midway and the now sort of fairly matured state. But they're all running it in a very, very different ways. Still, the challenges, the learnings which I talked about earlier, they still hold true, where a lot of focus tend to move more towards IT rather than business after the initial rollouts, which is again now some forces are doing it right, some forces are moving there. That's one of those things. But from our perspective, the way we try to leverage our learnings is through user groups. Obviously, we do go out and see across now, meet various police forces on an ongoing basis. So whatever, say for example, GMP is doing right or better, we can take it to other police forces we are working with, and vice versa. A lot of things we have shown or introduced in GMP are the result of what we are doing in other police forces. So some of the other police forces are leading on to some other programs. So that's what we act as a bridge in you know, sort of sharing that information across all our existing customers. And now coming to the second question, the optic structure within HCL. It's majorly now I would say divide. It sits under the public sector vertical within HCL, and in terms of structure, majorly there are two parts to this. As I see, one is which is sort of running the end customer engagements or end forces engagements. So there are teams based out across now various police forces, or we have a shared support service center as well now here in Agam, from where we provide those support to various police forces. The other aspect to this is innovation, product development, and all those things. So this is something which we do remotely, where there is a continuous network within HCL. There's a wider mobility COE, which now works hands in gloves with us. We continuously keep delivering those technologies in the background and then trying to introduce those to various police forces.
Great, thank you very much. So back to you, Chris, again, I think on this one, how do you manage officer well-being, effective supervision and team spirit when also wanting to maximize time out of the station? Are officers still welcome to come back to the station during their tour?
I think it's a really good point, and I wouldn't be surprised if that was a question from a police officer. You have a look at the dynamics of response officers and beat officers now. We have got so many student officers that lots of our vehicles are double crewed. So you know, we do know that double crewing means that officers often feel better. They feel they enjoy work more when they're working alongside someone, but it's not necessarily the best for our productivity and efficiency. But at the moment, we are seeing a lot of double crewed resources just because we have tutors and students, which, you know, any police officers on this webinar will understand. But yes, they are welcome back at the police station. I think there is a difference between, you know, going to a crime and putting the crime in over the phone and dealing with that. And officers are also getting involved in complex investigations that might have to work with, say, CID or a safeguarding team, and will come back into the station. So they are welcome back. I don't feel it's like it was when I joined in '94, when I was sent out at 7 in the morning and had to walk until I came back at 3, and then didn't do much during that tour of duty apart from walk about. Our officers at the moment are so flat out busy and going to so many jobs that we can give them the tools so they can be as efficient as they can at those jobs that they can stay out for, but obviously come back in when they need the supervision and support or the back office systems that they might need for the more complex jobs. And that's how it works. And just to think about what we had to do is we did have to change some behaviours, and this was a challenge, and it is challenging, and sometimes you can get some kickback. So we did remove some terminals from certain writing areas. So when we invested in the new technology, we took out some desktop computers, because by having them all there, it enabled that people could all sit on a computer rather than using their mobile. If you sort of take some equipment away, it sort of drives behaviour onto the mobile. And that's quite challenging. And the next steps of that, when we roll out to Windows 10 and we go to a much more laptop focused organization, and we'll have a lot less desktops, and staff will have to use their mobile devices. It's the nature of where we're taking our technology in Greater Manchester Police.
Great, thank you. Kind of two questions here. I think they're kind of related in terms of what steps have you taken to enable officers and members of the public with additional needs to be able to engage with digital policing? And while you've talked about the benefits, obviously, for the officers, what about the end users, as in the citizens? What benefits have you seen, if any, there?
Yeah, so people with additional needs, it's really quite interesting, and that's why I said you have to be careful when you're trying to drive performance onto a mobile phone that doesn't suit everybody based on their individual needs. So accessing other ways of other systems or other computers that are tailored to what that individual might need is still really important for us. So we do understand it's not for everybody. And we do think that chatbot will really help that as well, because if someone finds typing into a mobile phone difficult, or finds a screen layout difficult because of the colours or the resolution, or some people have those sorts of challenges, then we think things like robotics and chatbot will really be able to help them as well. So we are trying to tailor the solution to make sure it meets the needs of most of our workforce that need to use it. With regards to the citizens, some of it was about that actual, when someone's been a victim of crime or something terrible's happened to them, we'd never wanted our police officers to be seen as someone that came along and just took a load of details off them and wrote them down. And a lot of the time in the past, it has been officers have walked into people's houses and spent their time writing, looking at a pad and paper, taking details down. So if you can make the capturing the details bit as simple and effective as possible, you can spend more time dealing empathetically with the victim and actually investigating the crime, spending more time, helping the victim through the trauma that they may have had there and then, and reassuring them about the service you're going to provide, rather than just doing a bit of a process of capturing loads of details and filling in a form. As you can imagine, I always, and this is how it was for me, and I did this not that long ago just to see what it was like, going to a victim's house, capturing all the details and asking if you can borrow the telephone to ring it through. That was only about 5 years ago we were doing that to a crime bureau. Was really quite a poor service when you think about it now. And even the fact that officers could ring it through on a mobile phone was much better. But the fact now that they can capture it on the device, it's just such an improvement.
Fantastic, certainly. I think we have time for one more question, and I think I will ask both Chris and Jared maybe to answer some of this. You touched a little bit on this earlier when you spoke about the future plans, but what plans do you have for your back office systems which utilize automation, self-service digital assistance, and conversational experiences like you mentioned, the chatbots? This would unlock data and insights to inform leadership and free up frontline resources. So Chris, Shard, who would like to take that one first in terms of?
No, I can.
You go for it, Shard.
You go. Okay, thanks. So from our perspective, I think though it is branded or it is known as a mobility solution across various police forces, but I see this more as a field force solution. So there are various aspects to this where now mobility is just one part of it, where yes, frontline officers, they get access to a lot of functionality they want to access, and in a way they want to access it. But like chatbots, which Chris mentioned, virtual assistants, plus situational awareness, social media integration, all of this comes very, very handy. We see this as a combination of so many things coming together to give a holistic picture to a frontline officer, where design thinking, user experience, those things become key. Whatever they need to do in the best possible way, they should get access to that particular area. Now is where we want to take the solution going forward. The normal sort of low code platform type things which Chris mentioned in one of his slides is something which we can leave it to the business, to the force to hand it on their own, but more focus is on just ensuring that the platform is there and it is for purpose going forward. Yeah, Chris.
Well, just I suppose beyond our relationship with HCL, we have got, some of the difficulties you have is you have other suppliers of different products, and it's how you improve those. So one of the suppliers we have is Crown, who delivers our duty management system. And obviously that is an awful lot of self-service at the moment, and we want to upgrade that system to put that onto our mobile phones to enable, a much simpler booking of annual leave, rest days in lieu, time off, those sorts of things as well. But I mean, that's available on the desktop. But the whole back office self-service, such as expenses, a lot of the HR functions, again, we have some of that through our shared service that we have with Trafford Council in Greater Manchester. But some of that still involves filling out basically a digital version of a form and sending it in. And I think the person asking the question is more about how we can make that much more intuitive and simple for our officers. We haven't got that sorted yet. For one of the things that police officers always complain about is uniform and kit, and accessing it from, stores when they're used to ordering something off Amazon at home and it come in the next day. Yet they have to fill out a 3-page form in triplicate to send through to our clothing department to get them to release a white shirt. So we're very, very aware of all that, and it is in our transformation program plan. It's just that we have prioritised the mobility of our frontline officers over it at the moment.
Fantastic. Okay, great. Right. Well, that brings us to the end of the hour and the end of the presentation. I would just like to sincerely thank both Chris and Sharad again for sharing the journey and the learnings that you've had in implementing this transformational solution. I'd also like to thank those who have attended live and those who will hopefully attend on demand. Take care and have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks.